that was taken, has been used numerous times from the corporate world, and tried to be turned into something that's a little bit more collaborative, kinder, and gentler for, I guess, adaptation in higher education, student affairs, residence life, and housing operations. So we're just going to go ahead. All right, the learning outcomes, the goals or hope for today is that people who are participating will be comfortable with the basic reorganizational process. They understand how it works and what the steps are. You'll see in the handouts that it tries to be pretty methodical, and there's sort of step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And then finally, that people feel reasonably comfortable being part of a reorganization process. This may be, too brief of a session to actually feel like you're somebody who would be able to lead a session without further work, but should be able to be pretty comfortable with how a process works and know enough to be able to get more information, know where to go, and have a general overview of it. So that's what we're hoping people will come away from today. All right, why restructure? If in your groups, I know some people are alone and some people are with other folks, if you just want to take a moment to brainstorm the reasons why people restructure, I'll be silent for just a minute while you have a chance to just reflect and write a few ideas down. Okay. I'm not sure what you have. Certainly, there are numerous reasons why people do restructuring. I think some people put them into categories of from pretty affirmative, proactive, positive to ideas that may be more intimidating or scary. The first thing that often comes to people's mind are to downsize, to eliminate positions, to fire people, release people from employment, to take care of personnel problems that aren't being addressed another way rather than dealing with them in more of a behavioral issue, just doing a restructuring to change things around. Restructuring is also done, obviously, for efficiencies. It's done to realign the staff and the organization with the core purposes and mission, often done when new employees come in or new leadership comes in. It can be done when people just think that it's time to really look at people's roles and functions and how folks work together to really accomplish some pretty positive things. So I think restructuring is done for a number of those reasons and in many, many more. What's required for a really strong restructuring process is what this session is going to go through in a fair bit of detail. So just a little fun, keeping it super simple. KISS may be used for other things too, but it really is important, I think, and we'll talk about it throughout this session, of being direct and clear with what's going on, because reorganizations can be used for purposes that intimidate people or instill fear. Being direct and clear and basic and simple is very important, because people will often think there are hidden agendas and the information is being done secretively. And so being as simple and as clear as possible is really important to try to have everybody involved be comfortable. All right, so just a checklist of items that are required for a successful restructuring, and maybe required is too strong of a word, but certainly motivation and a reason for restructuring. Being upfront and clear with folks again, which is going to be a dominant theme this morning. Why is this being done? Telling people it's being done because we need to reduce 10% of our staff, or it's being done because we have a new provost, a new president, a new director, a new vice president, whatever it is. We're being done because we feel like we need more staff, and we've been growing so quickly we're not sure if we're in alignment anymore. But whatever it is, whatever's motivating it, wherever that's coming from, being as honest and open with people as possible. People are going to fill in the blank anyway, and telling people exactly what is going on and being honest. We all want to be treated with honesty. We all care a lot about integrity, and so being very upfront with people is critical. It may be one of the most important points. Honest and open communication from the very beginning and throughout the process. Outlining to people what the process is going to look like, how it's going to go, the steps that are going to occur, the approximate time frame for it, and we'll talk about all of those things, but being very direct. Obviously, involvement and inclusion, as is possible. Collaboration is very important. Most work environments are not pure democracies, as everybody knows. And so everybody may not be voting on the direction in which things go. There may be an opportunity for people to actually, vote or to actually give their input that's treated as a vote. But in most cases, I think there's a desire for lots of inclusion, for lots of involvement. But it doesn't necessarily mean that everybody's ideas about what's going to happen will happen as people have put them forward. And then a commitment of time and resources. Reorganization processes typically take a lot of time, especially when they're done well and when they involve the 3 items above. When there's inclusiveness, when people are being really thorough, it takes time, and it takes some money. Sometimes reorganization processes include outside consultants, and so there'll be costs for honorariums for the consultants or salaries, depending on who's hired. If you hire a private firm versus hiring peers who typically, don't charge much, but it's nice to offer an honorarium. And then following the order of the steps is critical. And while some of it is iterative, it's really important to go through the steps in the order that they're outlined. It just works very, very well when you do that. So it's a little bit formulaic, a bit of a recipe. All right, levels of work. This is something that a number of people in higher education, student affairs, find to be kind of an offensive concept, and they find it to be hierarchical, which is not really the intent. Although you can certainly take it any way you like. Excuse me. But these levels have been put together, and it's a very corporate model. But a level 1, level 2, 3, and 4 doesn't mean that somebody's more important or somebody's less important. It simply tries to describe sort of the scope of work that they're doing and the processes and modes and the needs and the focus. So somebody who's at a level 1 typically is given direction and guidelines and carries out that on pretty much a day-to-day or routine basis. So a brain surgeon may be considered procedural. Custodial staff member may be considered procedural. Some types of computer programming. There are some people who make 7-digit figures a year who do procedural work, and there are people who make very modest salaries. So it's not an importance issue. It's just the scope and the focus. And this is really important. We'll keep talking about that. A level 2 is typically diagnostic. 6 months tends to be the outlook period. Very, very focused on being told what needs to be done, and then the person fills in the blank and completes the process. They need to decide what's important, and then they accomplish that particular task. Level 3s are projective, so they tend to be doing some longer-term planning. Certainly are given general parameters, but then people in level 3 work tend to execute those. And then level 4 tend to be vice presidents and presidents or CEOs of large companies. Some people would have 5 levels of an organization. Others would say that there are 4. And it's not so important as to how many levels, but it is important to know what people's scope and focus is. Because if you're going to be the very best at what you're doing, and you are dealing with a day-to-day detail level of work, somebody who is, for example, a brain surgeon, my preference, if I ever needed brain surgery, would be to have somebody who is doing dozens of them a week, if not more, as opposed to somebody who is doing a few brain surgeries and also working on national policy related to healthcare and working on how the hospital ought to run and the employee wellness program and long-term planning for construction. The very best person at procedural work is someone who is 100% focused on that particular level of detail that that person is doing, and they should be better at it than anyone else. People at level twos do more diagnostic work and should, again, be very, very good at it. Projective levels, level 3 folks, are working on longer-term plans, doing some strategic planning and outlooks, and again, they should be focusing at that level. And you can argue that it's possible to work at all the levels simultaneously. The reality is that it can be very difficult. Many of us are asked to do that. Certainly, the smaller the organization that you're in, the more hats you wear, and the more levels that you tend to need to work on. But when people are working within a level, and it's typical that a level 1 person would report to a level 2 person, level 2 would report to level 3, level 3 to level 4, so it's hierarchical in a supervisory sense. And that's typically because of outlook and perspective and sort of big picture view of the entire landscape. It doesn't have to be hierarchical in that sense, but it typically is. And when going through an organizational process, identifying who's a level 1, who's a level 2, and who's a level 3 can be really important, and getting those things clear can be really important. Again, it can also be very offensive to people, because people will relate level 1 with being less important, or they'll do a reverse grading system like, level 4, those are the A's, and then B's and C's, or sharks, minnows, salmon, or whatever we've grown up with, that somebody's more important than the others. And genuinely, it's not supposed to be that way. It really is just supposed to be trying to classify people, and not people, but positions by the scope of work that they're doing. So this is a pretty important concept, and we can certainly talk more about that if people have questions. All right, the reorganization process. So the first part, and we'll be going through each of these steps, is forming a design team, envisioning what the ideal organization could be, reviewing the current organization. We'll go through all of that, designing it, making a decision. We'll talk about what that usually involves, implementing that goal organization. So you've created this, you've done all this work, and now it's time for your new ideal or real organization. Hopefully the real and ideal are the same, are in place, and then it's time to evaluate it and maybe go through it all again or make the tweaks that are appropriate. All right. All right, a sample timeline. This may surprise some people. And if somebody's asked to do a reorganization process and takes in a timeline like this to a supervisor may say that's not fast enough. The reality is when you look at each one of these items and the time that it takes to do them, it's time consuming. Forming a reorganization design team can take some time. Each person needs to be contacted. They need to understand what the responsibilities and roles are going to be. They have to accept or not accept. If you're in an organization where people need multiple levels of approval. And so it depends on how long it takes for you to do the kinds of things that are required or a protocol within your organization. The next is envisioning the ideal organization. That also takes from 2 weeks to a month typically. Again, everybody will do it in their own process. This could be done on a 4 or 5 day retreat. Many of the steps could be done that way, but it's an time intensive process. And as we all know, we also have day jobs. This isn't the only thing that we're going to be doing. This is going to be happening while lots of other responsibilities are still there for us. Assessing the current organization typically takes 4 to 8 weeks. Designing the goal organization takes about that same amount of time. Implementation can take anywhere from a month to 3 years, typically, and then evaluating typically takes for us about half a semester, or if you're on quarters, just about a quarter to do a thorough evaluation. All right, step 1. So here are the nitty-gritty details. So the first step is that they're selecting who the team leader is going to be. There needs to be someone who's responsible for the overall process, and that person needs to be empowered by somebody. If it's being self-initiated, so if a department says, I really think we need to go through a reorganization because of the amount of time it takes and the resources that are going to be committed to it, getting permission or approval from one supervisor is pretty important, and the person who's leading it needs to really be empowered to make important decisions regarding the process. And so whether you're told to do a reorganization or decide to do a reorganization, having a responsible team leader is critical. You really can't do a process well without having one person as the point person. You can decide how hierarchical you want to be, but one person needs to be viewed as the point person. A process advisor can be very helpful. Typically that would be someone who knows how to do a reorganization process. That can be an outside consultant. It can be a member of the business faculty. It could be somebody in OD, in the organizational design area, in psychology. Many campuses have people who are very familiar with the reorganization process, and it can be really helpful to have somebody who's not a member of the organization assisting you along the way, because there's a lot to process. There's a lot to digest. This is intense stuff, even if you're doing it from the purest intentions and not doing it because there are downsizing occurring or to reduce positions where people are nervous. Even if you're doing it simply with the absolute best intentions of everything, having somebody assisting as an advisor and an expert can really help. And then 3 to 4 internal employees for the department. So if it's in housing or residence life, having that number of employees from that area. We're in student services, so having students be involved can be very helpful. Some people, it makes them nervous because they're going to be airing lots of information about staff and some pretty sensitive information. So for some folks, having students involved at all levels doesn't feel comfortable. Obviously, you need to do that in a way that's appropriate for your particular situation. And then having a couple of peers from other departments can be very helpful. So if you're in residence life and you work closely with the Office of the Dean of Students or with Judicial Affairs or the Counseling Center or the Career Center or admissions or some other folks, other colleagues who you trust and respect and who can really add value to the team can be very helpful. Again, it can be a little intimidating and everybody can feel a little bit vulnerable when you're exposing your organization like this, but it also can provide a lot of support. All right, the next part of step 1 is to train the team, explaining why this is occurring. Again, you're going to need to do this for the entire organization, but the team certainly needs to know and be clear. Clarity of purpose and mission is critical. Why are we doing this? Where is this coming from? And what are our goals? Explaining to people that which model is going to be used, if it's this or another one. So saying, here's the process, here are the steps that we're planning on following, making sure that people are clear. Although it's always hard to fully understand a process until you've been through it, it's important for people to generally understand how it's going to work. Making sure that everybody understands the function of the team, the roles and responsibilities that each person's going to have. Everybody's going to want to know what their role and their function is and how they're supposed to carry out their responsibilities, and then making sure that they understand how to utilize other resources. So again, if you're going to be using a consultant, internal or external, how you're going to be using the process advisor if you're going to have one, and just making sure everybody's really on board. And these are big deals. This is a big deal because you're taking on an organizational restructuring process is important, and everybody who's involved is going to want to know how it's going to work, because when their fingerprints are going to be all over it, and they want to make sure that they're comfortable with it. And then developing a timeline and a checklist. And again, there's handouts for the sample timeline that we went through, and then the checklist that I think you have as a handout and we'll be looking at in the slides a little bit more. So at the end of step 1, the result should be that you've begun. You may be in denial a little bit, but at this point, once you've gone through these steps, you're on your way. All right, and then it's time for the next step, which is step 2. This is really fun, for me at least. Maybe that's why I'm doing this session, because I enjoy this part of it, and I think many people enjoy. Some people would call it problem solving. Other people would call it creating your ideal vision of anything. This is an appreciative inquiry process. Folks from Case Western certainly would be familiar with it. And there's lots of different ways of doing this, but I think that this process is just a really well-articulated way of going about it. And that's where you get, and this lends itself very well to a retreat or to some very dedicated large chunk of time sessions where you really have 3 or 4 hours per time to really think about it. And again, if you can go on an overnight retreat, if that works well for your organization, that can be great too. So it's the discovery process where you literally go through each of these steps. What is it that we value and appreciate about our organization right now? And you ask people, and you need a facilitator for this. The people who are on the team you may have someone on there who wants to facilitate it. You may also want to get another facilitator who is familiar with this type of exercise or who's good at problem solving. Appreciative inquiry folks tend not to want to call it problem solving, but in some ways it is. But it's a much more affirmative, proactive way of problem solving. And so you ask people to think about a time when they really thought that the organization and their job was amazing. What was that like? What allowed for that to happen? And why did that experience mean so much? And you can spend a lot of time on each of those. As you can imagine, you can have some really dynamic conversations about that, and that needs to be captured because these are really this is sort of the essence when you go through this process of what you want your organization to look like. I mean, the whole purpose of doing a reorganization is to get to somewhere, and this step 2 is helping you define what it is that you would like to look like. And so you dream. These are just some fun questions that are part of an appreciative inquiry exercise. Where you imagine that you've been asleep for a year. Your organization is going, I don't know, maybe you're in Sweden receiving the Nobel Prize for Residence Life and Housing Programs. One hasn't been created yet, but someday, right? What do you see? What is it? What is it that your organization has done and looks like? And then, thinking about how you want your organization to be. I know all of us from time to time think, if we could only do this, if we could only be like this, we have such incredible opportunity. We've got all this unrealized potential. If we could accomplish this, what would it look like? And talking about that, coming up with some level of agreement, consensus, if that works within your organization, and really writing it down, articulating it, putting it in paper, and circulating those copies and getting to just, and you don't need to, people don't have to wordsmith to death, but it's important to have something that's written down that you can say, this is what it would feel like for us. And feel is probably important. And then designing it, and designing is what it would look like. What would it look like if you could do anything you wanted? So you've discovered what you care about most. You've dreamed about what might be possible. And then you're designing it. You're putting those things that you've written down, and now you're trying to come up with, there's a little bit of reality in this. You're not quite at reality yet, but there's a little bit. What would it look like if you really did maximize the positive elements, the central part of your organization, and how would you turn those dreams into reality? What would that look like? What would people be doing? How would people interact with each other? How would you structure your organization so that it really functioned on all cylinders, like, as the quote goes, a well-oiled machine? And then the final one, which I think is really important, and there's another slide, but what are your aspirations? What do you want to be? Because the reality is that for the most part, we can accomplish just about anything that we want to do if we really are dedicated to it. If we really choose to have the wherewithal to do it, we often can accomplish some pretty great things. Okay. Then our destiny. So you've designed it. What needs to happen in order to carry out the potential future of the organization? How do you do that? How does our organization learn together? How do we actually make things occur? When things don't go well, when we have to be flexible, we always have to be flexible. But when we really need to improvise, when we need to deal with things that are thrown at us, we all have very, very busy jobs that have lots of unpredictable. What's predictable is that we don't know what's going to happen. And how do we do that all together? So how do we make that happen? How do how do we execute it? And then taking all of those things and putting it down on paper. So write down for each person, every single person in your organization, for every role and every function. You have Post-it notes, or you can use index cards. It doesn't matter. And write down as many things as possible that you need to have addressed in order to fulfill the 4 items from before: the dreaming and the destiny and the design and the discovery part. So write everything that you possibly can down, all the functions and what you want, where you want to be going. And then once you have, and you're doing this with the entire design team, you probably will have, if you spend enough time on it, you'll probably have dozens, if not hundreds, maybe even several hundred Post-its with all these things that you want to, functions that you want to accomplish, things that you want to achieve. And then you put them together. Those of you who have practice in qualitative research will be familiar with doing this. You put it into categories, and we'll talk a little bit about the sort of social research categorization. But put those into categories that help make up your ideal or dream organization. And then, here you go. You get to put it into an ideal organizational chart. So you've got your themes, you've got your categories of functions, and then you put it into an org chart. What would it look like? And then because you're still a little bit in dreamland, you get to savor it for a little while, because you don't have to be at reality yet. You're on your way to reality, but you're not quite there. And so at this point, if that's all gone well, you will have a detailed organizational chart that will be something that people will be excited about. They would aspire to be and say, if we can only do this. That's where people should be at the end of this process. All right. And then step 3, assess and document your current organization. For some people, they'll be like, why did we do step 2 before we did step 3? Well, because you probably already have somewhat of a handle on step 3, and it's important to think about where you want to be. So now you go on to, now you're in reality. You haven't yet reconciled reality with the dreamland, but we'll be doing that shortly. So at this point, and this is really important, this is also an incredibly sensitive part of the process because you're going to be dissecting people's current roles. So gather everybody's formal job descriptions. You can imagine sort of people's skin crawling when they're asked for that. Well, that's not what I really do, and that's not what I really do. Well, obviously the intent of job descriptions is to try to capture what you really do, so there may need to be a backstory of work to make sure that job descriptions are as reflective as possible. The outcome of this process could also be that people's job descriptions change to be more reflective of what they're doing if they don't already match. You may find in an organization, if you're in a large organization that doesn't put a lot of emphasis on job descriptions or the accuracy or clarity of them, that some people don't have job descriptions at all. And so obviously it needs to match your organization's culture. And then you list the actual tasks and assignments that people are doing separate from the job description. So you have the job description as a document, from human resources or from your files, and then you actually are having people list what they actually do, a complete list of what they do. And the good thing about this is because this can be a process where people feel vulnerable, this allows people, it gives people the power to say, no, what I really do is the following. This is what I do on a regular basis. And so it allows people, to validate and to write down, this is what I do. Then the next thing, once you have that, job descriptions and the actual job tasks and assignments that each person has self-authored, is that there's role conversations. Some people would call them interviews, and there's a handout for this. It's called the employee role conversation. It's pre-printed questionnaires, and typically what will happen is that 1 or 2 members of the reorganization team will meet with each employee in the organization. One will take notes, and the other one will serve as the facilitator of the conversation. And you go through those conversations, and it will talk about the job description, what the person thinks of the job description, how close it is to reality, and how much it's not. They'll look at the actual job tasks and assignments paper that the person filled out themselves and compare that with the job description. And we'll talk about how they feel about their role within the organization, the barriers, the opportunities, and again, it gives the chance of each employee to really be heard and listened to and feel like their role really, really matters. Okay, then more qualitative research. There's an organizing and collecting and a coding of the data that's received. Similar to the data that was received for the ideal organization, you'll have data from the conversations, from the self-authored actual job tests and assignments papers, and then the job description. So you'll be able to come up with themes and see what seems consistent, what doesn't seem consistent, and where the organization really, really is, which is helpful. Okay, so for those people who are not, who haven't done a lot of qualitative research, this should help a little bit. Although like you're going to be getting advice and consulting with other folks. I think if you haven't done a lot of qualitative research, it is helpful to get somebody, maybe from the College of Education or sociology, to assist with the coding. And so at the very bottom of the pyramid, there's raw data, and then codes of data, collapsed codes, categories, collapsed categories, and themes. And this is very similar to an outline or a reverse outline, where you take those pieces that need to be collapsed. You start with the raw data, and then you put them into themes. And those themes make sense to the organization. It would be whatever works. You'll see the information itself will lend itself to the themes that make sense for it. And you go through this process, and when you're done with it, especially if you've had a little bit of support from someone who's familiar with the steps, it will show you what you really have, and it'll give you a really accurate picture of your current organization and what you're focused on. And it may be that you think that you should be focused on student development, and what you're actually focused on is operational efficiencies, or safety and security, or revenue generation, or whatever it is. Or you may find that you're focused on a whole bunch of things, or that you're not focused at all. You may be very pleased with what you see. You may not be pleased with what you see, but it will help you to get a picture of where you are right now. And you may say, "Wow, we rock," or you may say, "We kind of rock," or you may say, "Ooh, we've got some work to do before we rock." And it will help. It will help you to be able to write these things down and see them, and it's a collective process because you're interacting with all of the folks in your organization and with your team. All right, step 4. This is the process where you reconcile step 2 and step 3. So you're comparing the ideal organization that you've used the appreciative inquiry exercise for and your current organization that you have gone through and collected the job descriptions and asked for the individual task sheets, and then done the employee role conversations. And this is where you put those things together. Where's the difference? What's the difference between what you dreamed and you said, this is what we would look like if we were firing on all cylinders and if we were really accomplishing what we wanted to, and this is where we are right now. You can look at where the inefficiencies are or problem areas are and look at what roles and functions need to be changed. And then you go on to designing a feasible and effective goal organization. So a goal organization is a little bit different than an ideal organization, and it's a little bit different than your current organization. It's where you want to go next. It's, okay, we know if we could do anything in the world, this is what we do, and maybe you can't do anything in the world. This is where we are right now, and then where are our goals? Where do we want to get to, and how do we want to get there? So you lay out the structure, you think through the process and functions for each one of those, And then it's really important, because this is what people are going to want to start seeing. They're going to say, well, what role am I going to be in? Is my position still in there? Am I gone? And is it true that you eliminated me? This is a very sensitive thing, as you can imagine, because the intent here is that you're actually going to be developing what you want your organization to be. This is where reality comes. I mean, you've already dealt with reality into what you currently are, but this is the new reality. This is the reality that you're wanting to create. And that you think you can create. This is where feasibility and effectiveness come in. Costs, I'm sure that somebody at some point will have to do a full financial model for what the dollar figures will be, if there's a change, if there's an addition of personnel or a reduction of personnel, if there was a target amount or percentage of payroll that needed to be cut as the original reason for doing the restructuring. This is where the financial analysis needs to come in. And then once the design team feels really good about their goal organization and says, yep, that's where we want to be going, it's presented to the department director or the associate or assistant vice president or the vice president or the president, depending on where you are. This would be sort of the next level up. It wouldn't necessarily be to the president. In most cases, it would be to the division's leadership. At this point, hopefully, you'll have an efficient goal organization, and this will be where you want to head. All right. So you've presented this, and you've received feedback, and now it's time to decide where are you going to go. Has it been approved? Do the people above think that it is ready to move forward, or do you need to do some tweaking? As you can imagine, people are feeling pretty vulnerable at this point. Has the goal organization been approved as a whole, or just some components? Have you been asked to go back to the drawing board? Is the change that is being proposed, an entire redo of the organization, or is it just a small portion? And is the variances between the ideal organization and the current organization that have you going to the goal organization? So where we are now, where we want to be, and then that transition period of time, is it incremental, or is it going to be one fell swoop? Part of that, all of that depends on your current circumstances, how quickly the change is needed, and who wants the change and the motivation for the change. Which leads to the next step. All right, implementation towards the goal organization. Again, is the change going to be done whole, systematically, or is it going to be done incrementally? Typically, I think that incremental change tends to last more. It tends to be better accepted. Whole, radical, revolutionary change tends to be more difficult. That doesn't mean it's necessarily inappropriate. Incremental change tends to be easier for people and tends to be more lasting. One revolution tends to spark another revolution, which tends to spark another revolution, whereas incremental change tends to have a lot of staying power and be sustainable. Clear and open communication. At the very beginning we talked about clear and open communication, and this is really, really important. Telling people what the changes are going to be, who's approved of those changes, how real they are, or how proposed they are if they haven't been approved. But if you've been given approval to communicate to people, but the plan itself hasn't been given approval because there's still a desire for feedback from everybody, communicating with people in a sensitive and appropriate manner. Obviously, if somebody is going to be losing their job or changing their job, especially if it's going in a direction that is viewed as undesirable, making sure that that's done appropriately and professionally in the right forum with the right people, that it's legal, that it's done in compliance with policies, and that you can sleep at night in the way in which you're handling it is incredibly important. And I think everybody knows how important it is to be sensitive as far as the timing and the style and approach that's taken. And then, if you're in a department that's very small or intimate, or one in which gossip and other things can run rapid, it's obviously important to think about those factors and to handle it appropriately. And empathy is a pretty important thing here. Obviously, the result of this is it means that your organization is changing. You're actually going from where you were to where you're going. All right. So you've done it. You finished. Your organization is now the new organization. And now you're evaluating it. And this is going to be a big deal, obviously. I mean, the whole thing is a big deal. Doing a real change, I mean, genuinely changing is difficult, it's monumental. Hopefully it's a positive thing and it accomplishes the desired outcomes. But evaluating it is going to be a big deal, especially if people were very tentative and hesitant about it. There are some who are going to want the evaluation to come out poorly. Others are going to say, it doesn't really matter what happens in the evaluation, there's no going back. Some people will want to go back. But it's important to listen to people and to hear what people are saying. And so, obviously good ways of doing an evaluation for this would be focus groups, written surveys, trying to do the employee role conversations again. So, okay, and you might start off by saying, okay, it's been 6 months or it's been a year since we've talked. When we talked last time, you were in this particular role. Our organization has changed. You're now in this role. Tell me about that, and how is that going, and go through the process again. And that can be a very validating or helpful process for a number of people. And then I think it's people who've been through an organizational structure change, regardless of whether it was done under circumstances that felt favorable or those that felt challenging or stressful. Giving it time. People put a lot of effort and a lot of work into it, presumably, assuming that it was done with fairly pure intentions. Giving it some time. Change takes time. We know that it does. And so it's really critical to give the appropriate amount of time that it takes to work through that. All right, so the checklist, this is really review, and you have this as a handout, and we don't need to go through it in detail. I want to allow some time for questions. But obviously starting off is you're forming the reorganization team. And then step 2 is creating your ideal vision. Step 3 is assessing and documenting where you currently are. Step 4 is the reconciliation of those two to create the goal organization. Step 5 is implementing it, and then 6 is evaluating it. And the check boxes are here because it can be very helpful and fulfilling, those of you who are list makers, to go through this as a recipe. I found when we follow these steps, and of course one does not have to be rigid, but this process has really been formulated, I don't know over how many years and by how many researchers, but when we adapted it for student affairs and residence life, to sort of soften the edges of it a little bit, it was already a pretty good recipe. We just added a little more salt or a little less salt and a little more sweetener, I suppose. All right. Oops. Go back. So that's really the end of the presentation. I wanted to allow time for questions if people have any questions. And the big issue is, how do you apply this process to your organization? And is it something that you can apply to your organization? So that is the end of the session.
Okay, Mike, I'm going to open up the lines so we can just all speak freely with any type of questions. So let's see if we have any questions.
Muted.
Hello?
Hello.
Any questions? Do you have any questions for Michael? Okay, Michael, I don't hear anything, so I don't think there are any questions out there.
Okay.
I do know that I really enjoyed going through this at Case Western. It was just an eye-opening experience talking to housekeeping staff all the way to the upper administration and seeing how everybody views the department and the different nooks and crannies that you might not think of each day, but it's something that somebody's dealing with every day.
Right.
It's just an unbelievable experience for me as a professional just to get that type of look at just what my position meant to the department. So,
Great. Did it change the way you interacted with people?
Oh yeah, and a huge respect too. They allowed me to better understand where other individuals were coming from. Like with just simple requests and like why it was such a short timeline. I understood why it was a short timeline, or it felt like it was just all of a sudden. I was able to gain a better perspective of what was really going on within the entire department. So it was great.
That's great.
Okay. Well, Michael, thank you very much for your time today. Greatly appreciate it, as well as I know everybody else does with Lakuho. So enjoy the rest of your week, and thank you so much.
All right. Thank you very much, Rooney. And thanks, everybody, for participating. I hope everyone has a good week. Take care.